Hello and welcome to the Creative Synthesist podcast. Today you're joining us for an episode of our Creating Mental Wellbeing series where we discuss the creative health communication framework frame by frame. Today we'll be discussing frame 2, which is looking at scale of impact. Right, for anyone who didn't join us for our first episode, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you very much for providing me the opportunity to introduce myself. My name is Pruga. I'm a musician. I'm Jane's PIC, which stands for partner in crime, and I'm a filmmaker as well. Did I say I make music? And that's that really. And I'm just I'm a regular person.
And I am Jane Hearst. I'm the creator of the Creative Health Communication Framework. So part of this setup is I come with the frame and Pruga offers a more of a layperson perspective on that discussion point.
Yeah.
So this one I'm going to find difficult because it feels like there's a lot to unpack, but there's also not a lot to it.
I think it's difficult.
So this one is quite a short topic. It looks at scale of impact. If I kind of boil that down, scale of impact can be applied in multiple different ways. That's what makes it kind of complicated, even though it's kind of simple at the same time. The one way of doing that is thinking about the things that I do for my mental health and well-being. One of them might be something that I do that has this very small impact on my well-being. So it might be that I'm doing a kind of mindfulness exercise. It helps me just turn off some stress, helps me to refocus my mind. But if I'm dealing with something quite significant in my life, that might not be quite enough to tackle it. Whereas for select parts of my life, I might choose to engage with services that are focused on trauma or something very specific, these kind of high impact services. So this is about thinking about where on that scale things are and thinking about the things I do day to day. How do those things impact me?
Okay.
Yeah.
I like it.
What are your initial thoughts?
It sounds very broad. It sounds like, like it could be something as small as to be able to, do, a little stress toy could be, small scale, just day-to-day anxiety or like work meeting anxiety, need a little something to play with. And then like you say, it could go all the way up to like people potentially grieving and what sort of things are in place to deal with that, right?
Yeah.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Because it's so broad, I think it might be best that you give me some questions or something, because I don't know really.
Okay, so obviously this is called scale of impact, and that's because in this book it was focused on service providers, so looking at how we can translate that idea of scale into the way that they communicate about their services. So one of the examples that I give is if you're working in hospitals, you might find that different hospitals have different limitations to how much funding they have available to commission services or products. And so one way of going about that is when you're entering those discussions, having this kind of tiered idea of what you offer. So one of the examples that I've put in the book is having artwork on the walls. We've seen that there's emerging evidence that suggests that having art visible, it's a certain type of art, normally things that are more natural feeling, certain colours that are more naturally soothing, can have an impact on how quickly you recover or how much you perceive pain. So for people who are in hospitals, who are going through procedures, if they can feel less pain and heal faster, that both improves the experience for the person, but it also means that you are reducing the amount of time they're having to stay in hospital, which both great experience for the person getting back to their regular lives, but also great for the services as they're struggling with beds and things like that at the moment. that's kind of one of the entry level ways that you might help. And sometimes in some hospitals, we see that they might not have a budget for art that's just generalized, but they do have a budget for signposting. So how can we improve the way that signposting around a hospital is a bit more beautiful, a bit more engaging, makes the hospital environment feel a bit more like home and not this clinical environment that's scary to be in. One stage up from that might be, okay, well, now we've got artwork around the hospital. If we accompany that with a map of where those artworks are and a bit of a story behind them, then we might start to be able to have an arts trail. Now, the arts trail, in addition to all the benefits I mentioned before, helps people keep up their physical activity, which again improves the speed at which
What's an arts trail?
So it's like the same way that you might move through a museum to different rooms. This is basically a map where you're going, if you go to this part of the hospital, you'll find this art. If you go to this part of the hospital, you'll find this art. So people who need to be in the hospital but don't need to be in their beds constantly can have a walk around, return to the ward half an hour later, having had a bit more time to kind of keep their brain engaged. They're having that kind of exploratory, can I find the artwork? Where is it? What's going to be there? They have a little descriptor of what they're going to see, and then they're like, oh, this is the thing. Here's how I feel about it, and get to take that in the same way that you'd explore an arts gallery. And that physical movement aids recovery. It aids that kind of sense of feeling like there's a bit more to do with your day in hospital, because what we find with hospital environments is when we're thinking about what prevents people from feeling happy or what prevents people from keeping their health up in a hospital environment, is because you've stripped them of all the context that they normally naturally have at home. So some people will be like, well, art doesn't belong in a hospital. But if somebody is used to accessing creative things day to day in their own lives, but now they're in an environment where they can't just bring their whole home with them, how do we replicate the experience of being in a place where you have access to things that keep your brain engaged in a way that's a bit more beautiful and creative than the clinical environment? So that arts trail kind of aiding your movement, encouraging you to keep yourself mentally stimulated whilst you're in a hospital. And then one stage up from that might be participatory art. So having an artist come in on a ward, working with the people there. It might be singing beside the bedside or some kind of music playing, which we find is really good for people who are grieving or struggling with the emotions of somebody who might be waiting for somebody in a surgery, or they've just had some bad news. Might be people who are undergoing like cancer treatment where they've got to be there for hours and hours. Having those kind of live arts experiences can really improve the experience of being in a hospital, but it costs more, but it's also more effective in the way that it makes people feel and act around their health. So that kind of tiered approach to it, that's why this kind of idea of scale is important. It's better to have something than nothing. So if there's a limited budget available, limited resources, we can do something. But being explicit in the way that you say, but that something will have a smaller or greater impact the more that we invest. I think is really important, because otherwise people might go, well, the arts, we can make them really cheap. We can find a way of going around the corners. And absolutely, artists are like notorious for being able to be adaptable and find ways of creating with very little. But that doesn't mean that there's not a sacrifice that comes with it. The more we invest, the more we get from that. And that's part of why this frame, I think, is really important. But getting back to what you were saying in terms of asking a question or exploring this more together, the scale of impact, somewhat confusingly, comes from a scale that I use earlier on in the book called the scale of influence. And that's a scale that functioned very similarly, but I used it specifically within research. So when I was working with potential service users, so any members of the public who were interested in talking about their mental health and well-being, by going into interviews with them, I use storytelling as the way that I engage them and literally just ask them to talk about their lives as freely and openly as they felt comfortable to, but with some kind of prompts. And one of the prompts that I did was talking about, tell me your well-being, one of the moments where your well-being was at its best, and one of the moments where your well-being was at its worst. And what we did is we got little post-it notes and we created all the different factors that influence their life, both positively and negatively in both scenarios. And then on that scale, instead of going, these are the positive factors and these are the more negative factors, we went, these are the most influential factors. So if I was to talk about one of my own experiences, we mentioned in the last series that I've experienced a form of abuse. There was years where I knew that had happened to me, but the influence it had on me was quite light. I felt like it happened. I'd responded in the way that I needed to create a bit of distance. I had decided how I fit it into my narrative, and whilst it was upsetting, I was able to move on and remain safe. The moment that it became more crippling to me is when it became known publicly, and my family responded in the way that they wanted to. My community responded in the way that they needed to. And I started seeing cracks in my family because it was a member of my extended family that had happened with. And so once it started impacting my community, my kind of social makeup that kept me feeling grounded, that's when the amount that it was impacting my life shifted. It'd gone from having quite a low impact to quite a high impact. So it became a highly influential factor in what was making me feel happy or well. And so by comparing with people, what was the state of your well-being at its highest or lowest? And then tracking over time, how did that change in either scenario? What was the change? So for me, in the first one, initially, that experience had mainly impacted my environment. I knew what space not to enter to keep safe from that person. And so whilst it remained an environmental factor, it was quite low influence. But as soon as it became a social factor, it had rippling effects in my life that I felt out of control of and really struggled with. And that became highly influential. So by being able to go, this same factor has had two different impacts on my life. What was it about the context that made it have two different impacts? I think that's where this scale of impact really starts to come in.
Okay. I like it.
I feel like I did a lot of talking there and no questions followed.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if there's a question in there.
Do you have any questions?
No, it all makes a lot of sense. It all makes a lot of sense. So then I guess the question is like, for me too, is those, you spoke about the small influence and then a large influence or impacts or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And then so like, what did you do with the arts to deal with it on a small scale and a large scale? Do you know what I'm saying?
In that particular, my example.
Yeah.
So
like how did you incorporate creative health, you know what I mean, or like the arts to help, with the small impact, like, and how were those two different?
Yeah. So I guess in my experience of the abuse, I had initially used things like journaling or more kind of isolated arts experiences as a way of exploring that story, making sense of it, and then putting it to bed. And I think by the time it started having more of a social impact, I really needed to think of an art form that had a social engagement side to it. I didn't go out seeking that per se. I tried things like the mindfulness classes. They didn't impact in the way that I wanted to, because it wasn't dealing with the trauma. It wasn't dealing with the kind of social break that was happening. And I tried some other creative things that weren't seeming to not work for me. And then I was commissioned by Channel 4 to create a 3-minute film about the experience, which was absolutely terrifying at the time. I wanted to do lots of other films. I actually wanted to avoid that, but my boss at the time had said that anything that both scares and excites you at the same time is worth doing. So we'd put that application in, and was successful in that film. And I didn't go into that experience expecting to do it for therapeutic means, but I did benefit therapeutically. I had been going to therapy and it was a fantastic experience, but I needed this connecting that learning back to my community for that to get the full stop of that kind of process. And so there's multiple elements to that. The act of being in a room with actors, an actress specifically, and the crew meant that I needed to communicate this story in really reductive terms. I had to kind of take me out of it, put it into an objective script that was very minimum dialogue, get into the essence of what happened and the emotion that the takeaway that I wanted people to have. And like, what part of that story did I want to focus on? I chose to focus on how the thing that I struggled with a lot was feeling this sense of having failed myself. So this older version of me who has a lot of knowledge of the world, looking back at a very naive version of me who was vulnerable and judging her, that was a really horrible internal experience to have. Whereas if I created a film which was about those two versions of each other being able to exist in the same moment, and they give each other a hug, and the older person gets to say, "This isn't your fault." So even though the kind of wiser version of me gets to look at the naive version of me and go, "I accept everything that you are. Like, yes, it's led to danger, but this is who you were at that time, and had that danger not existed, this version of you would have been fine." So it was kind of reconciling that inner conflict in a story, which was helpful. Talking it through with other people meant that they got to ask questions about what my intentions were, and I got to hone in a bit more on what I wanted to take away from this experience. And then even moments like, I'd come from a acting background in my A-levels. I'd done a lot of acting. I got into filmmaking because I thought it would be easier industry to get into than acting. And so one of the things that I agreed with my actress, with her consent, was once we had gone through a few takes and she was starting to find it more difficult to do the acting around a particular scene, we had me sit behind the camera and fake cry so that she could respond to the visuals of me being upset and knowing this was a true story for me, but also knowing that I wasn't actually upset in that moment and I was using acting techniques. And so all of that kind of, whilst I was using acting techniques, it was a cathartic experience to be seen as being vulnerable around someone who really seemingly cared and was honing that for something beautiful in an art form. It felt like my story had purpose now. There was a takeaway from it. And then another great part of that was it appeared in a few festivals, one of which did a director's Q&A session, and people asking me questions about how I've felt about this kind of issue more widely in society, what insights it had given me, made me feel like I was being seen as a leader rather than a victim. And part of what I found really kind of destructive for my life is I didn't want to be a victim. So having that sense of leadership back made me feel more aligned to who I wanted to be, which was really empowering. It showed me that people cared about my voice at a time where a lot of my own community were talking about me, but not with me. I'd found that very difficult. It was like people were too scared to ask me how I felt or what happened because they didn't know how private it was. And I didn't want to volunteer that information to people who seemed to be very comfortably talking about me for hours and hours on end while I was in the room. It was like, if you can't see that that's just going to hurt me just as much as you asking me a question, and actually asking me a question is the more respectful thing if you're going to talk about me for hours whilst I'm in a room. Having people on those sets, in those cinema rooms, asking me questions to hear my version of the story, and me be back in control of that narrative myself was super, super powerful.
Nice. I like it. Pound is a pound.
And so, this kind of the scale of influence, which is that version that I used with in the research context, what we did there is we looked at even the mundane stuff in people's lives. So the kind of food they eat, the access to a house that they have, all these things that they might take for granted and see as small impacts. They're things that they just like expect day to day, yet in a different scenario that might feel like a huge influential factor on their lives. This was a really great way of trying to understand what people deem as like the necessary components to feeling well, and how different people might have different core ingredients to their well-being. And then we could see in some cases there was patterns. So the kind of access you have to a kind of flourishing community or education when you're younger impacted the way you might view your place in the world when you were older. But for the most part, people had very individualized notions of what things impacted their lives. So yeah, I guess, do you think there is anything in your day-to-day life that you underestimate how much it's influencing you?
It's difficult to do that subjectively, to say, do you think that there's anything in your day-to-day life that you think is impacting you?
Well, I guess, is there anything from your past that you might have thought wasn't a big deal, and then
from my past?
Well, no, like at one point in your past, you were like, you didn't realize how much of a big deal something was.
Yeah.
Like, what is an example of that you're comfortable with sharing?
Yeah, no, like bad food. I didn't realize, like, you can get into a place where if you're eating like, sorry, one sec. You can get into a place where if you're eating like sweets and stuff, and if you, or like, you know, just refined sugars and whatnot, and like bread, and like, you know, if you're having a lot of that, even if you're having vegetables as well or whatever, if you're having a lot of that, then you have these big spikes in your blood sugar level. And also it like kind of wrecks your gut as well. Like it changes your gut microbiome. And that has a direct connection to your brain and whatever. And that also has a direct connection to, and like there's a bunch of other sort of things around how it impacts the production of your hormones naturally and stuff like that as well, which means the general functioning of your body isn't operating as it's supposed to. And so I noticed that a lot of, after, you know, consistently eating a certain way and eating a healthy way and like restricting my eating patterns and stuff like that, I felt loads better. That combined with movement and stuff as well. So like not moving, like I think there is this idea that one day it will all figure itself out. Yeah. And that I'll start tomorrow kind of thing. Or I'll wait for this to happen before I decide to whatever. But people may never get there if they don't make an action or make a decision right here and now, and start right here and now, because the path to where you want to be has to start now. Can't start tomorrow. And so, yeah, it's, you know, something like food and moving. You might not feel particularly comfortable moving, but you got to move. Yeah. You might not feel comfortable restricting what it is that you eat because it makes you feel good. You got to restrict what you eat because it's instant gratification and not delayed gratification, but that delayed gratification is long-lasting gratification. But the instant gratification, generally speaking, whatever it may be, drugs, instant gratification, even like, you know, like alcohol, you know, instant gratification. I feel great. Nicotine is an instant gratification thing. Coffee is an instant gratification thing. You know, there's a lot of different bits, right? And so you got to, I guess, be you've got to be like restricted on what your vices are and where they're going to lead you. But long story short, I think for sure, in hindsight, I was eating food to make me feel happy, eating bad foods to make me feel happy. In the long term, it was doing the complete opposite, you know? So yeah.
And what was the moment that you decided that wasn't the case?
The moment I decided that wasn't the case, so I was actually talking to my brethren about this the other day. I remember this one time, so I used to have a motorbike, and I was on my motorbike, I was going somewhere. And then someone sent me a picture of, they was in a car, and they sent a picture because they saw me in traffic or whatever, and they sent a picture, and I was like, who's that? And then I read the message, and it was like, oh, I saw you today. And I was like, saw me today? I'm looking at the picture, I was like, oh, that is me. Yeah. But I didn't even recognize me, because obviously if you're out here taking photos in the mirror, no one's out here taking photos in the mirror and not sucking it in and not, you know what I'm saying? Like, no one's not doing that. No one's just out here like, here's me, here's my picture. No one's doing that. People aren't showing, like, people aren't real dealing themselves every day. Some people are for sure, but the majority of people aren't, right? And that's why, like, there's the beautification filters, and that's why there's this and that, and that's why you edit it and do all of those bits and whatnot. And so seeing someone else's thingy of me, where I don't get no opportunity to, like, you know, what's the best angle kind of thing. That was one thing. I was like, Lord have mercy, that was crazy. So that was one thing is, and yeah, so it's like, rather than the construct I've built in my mind of self-identity, it was the reality of the situation. It was someone else's view of me, but not even their subjective view. It was a camera, right? It was a captured thing, and I was like, Lord, okay, this is an uncomfortable like I've got to live with this reality that's actually what I look like. Okay, cool. And then there was, I think, another thing that I would have to say was probably where I really made like a wholesale change in terms of like my mindset and everything, was like back in 2017. I got to a place where, so my mom, bless her beautiful little soul, she's the kind of person that's like, she's just a positive kind of, she's a very positive kind of person. She's positive Polly. And she's like, you know, she's always said my entire life, that's like, you can be whatever you want to be. You just got to use your mind, but you can be whatever you want. And she's always said, like, if you want to move a mountain with your mind, which I always thought was just a crazy thing to say, but it's like, if you want to move a mountain with your mind, then you can do it. And she's always been there with like the positive reinforcement and stuff like that. And so I think I always had this warped sense of self, which is that like, but also as well, generally speaking, like growing up, I was always like a cute kid as well. And so like, I always got a lot of like, you know, people liked me, people thought I was, you know, good looking and whatever. And so then, you know, your self-image is like, well, I'm good enough, you know, like everyone tells me like I'm good enough and whatever it is. And so you get this sense of entitlement, you know. And so, you know, if you fast forward to 2017, where I think I was like, I don't know, I think I was like 21 maybe or something like that. And I came up against it, you know. I've had a bunch of jobs by this point. I've never stayed long in any of the jobs. I've never managed to sort of get a promotion or anything like that. I now don't have a job because I quit because it was just the worst job ever in a call center. And I was like, I remember I was like, I will, you know, I don't want to be hyperbolic or anything, but I do not like this whatsoever. This is killing my soul. It is destroying my soul. So mid shift, I just got up. I didn't even turn off the computer. I just got up, got my motorbike helmet, and just drove home. I didn't even tell anyone. I just texted my manager afterwards, like, yeah, I'm quitting, see you in a bit. And that was like a real low point, because I had to now come up against the reality of the situation, which is that my image of self is not marrying up to reality. If my image of self is that like, I'm good enough and I deserve what it is that I want, then I would be getting that. And I'm not getting that. And so I have to ask why. Why aren't I getting that? And, you know, you go through all sorts, right? Because your mind is trying to protect you from the reality of the situation. And because your mind's trying to protect you from the reality, it comes up with all sorts of stuff. The injustices that we were speaking about last week, right? It's like, why is it easier for some people and whatever? And like, why isn't anyone giving me a chance? And like, people haven't necessarily started at where I've started at, et cetera, et cetera. So you go through all of that, right? But none of that helps because it's not, nothing there is actionable. You can't do anything about that. These are all things that are outside of your control. And so it's like, okay, cool. Well, then now what? And then, you know, the sort of the like, you know, the demon in the corner is still there, right? But you don't want to have to face it because it's too scary. It's scary. It's like you can see it in the peripheral, and that is, you know, the personification of truth. And you don't want to see it. And so, you know, you go for whatever, and so you wreck in your mind, and then you have to come up against the reality, which is, and you have to, you know, look your demons in the face and say, maybe I have just not done enough. Maybe I am not good enough. Maybe I have to change the way that I am. Maybe I have to change the way that I see the world. If I want something, then maybe I have to be a much better version than who I am now, because clearly who I am now is not good enough. And so that led me on a path, right? Because I was also very close to like, you know, murking myself off. It felt like a reality. It felt like, yeah. So the reason it felt like that is because what I then done is I realized that, wait, so to get where I want to get, I'm already 20 now. I sound like how I sound, right? I don't sound like I come from any money or anything. I sound like I come from a bloody council estate. I've got tattoos on my hands. I'm an ethnic minority. I've got like essentially I don't have no GCSEs, you know, no formal education. I'm dyslexic, severe dyslexic. I've clearly got some sort of something else going on in my mind. And so, and you know, in terms of my like job history and whatever, and what I have to offer to the professional world, I don't really have much to offer to the professional world, you know? So I'm undesirable across multiple dimensions. What? There isn't much point. And if we're all going to die anyway, then it doesn't really matter if I die now, right? And so, you know, in that deep, dark place is when, for me personally, is when I think I found, I don't know what it was. Maybe it's God, I don't know. But I just asked myself a question. I asked myself like two questions. I was like, I just said to myself, I was like, have you done everything that you can? And this was the first time I ever heard a voice in my head that wasn't my own. And the response was no. And I was like, whoa, that was kind of wild. And I weren't under the influence of any intoxicants or anything like that. And yeah, the voice said no, like, you know, you haven't done everything. It was just a no. And then the next question was, can you do more now and be better now? And the voice was like, yes. And I was like, and so it was this massive turning point. It was this like epiphany. It was this surreal moment of being like, okay, cool. Well, I tell you what, let's have one last go at it, right? And but let's really try. And so literally after having that conversation with myself in a dark room with no lights on, I went to YouTube because I was like, let me just try to find something that's gonna like point me in the right direction. And it was so crazy. The first video that came up on YouTube was this guy talking about the law of compensation, and in there he described that you are compensated directly for how how difficult it is to replace you. And what I realized is that, okay, well, I've always had low to no compensation because I don't really have anything to offer. I'm not competitive in whatever field or market it is that I'm participating in. And that's in everything, right? Is that like my body is like, I'm not like, I'm on the, whatever the scale is of like undesirable, then like I'm on the low end of the undesirable scale. In terms of like my job experience, there's lots of people that are where I'm at, and you know, if I want to get a high paying job, I'm at the desirable side in terms of if I'm trying to get up there and apply the capacity for me to be able to articulate myself undesirable. You know, there's a bunch of all of these things. And so I just looked at every aspect of my life that I felt like I was deficient in. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, I'm going to become efficient in all of those. And I'm going to try to excel in all of those. And so food was one of those. I started to look a lot into intermittent fasting. I started to look a lot into a ketogenic diet. And I started to learn that, you know, people might not be aware of it now, but I think it might like trigger your memory. But if anyone in school ever saw the food pyramid, where like at the bottom it had like breads and whole grain sort of foods and whatever, and like maybe like just before the last one it had like meats and oils in there and whatever. And so, you know, like, you know, common sense would suggest that like you should be eating like mainly like a bready sort of carby diet. But what I learned from researching ketogenic diets is that it's actually the complete opposite. That should be more of a rarer thing for you to be consuming. You want to kind of try to be as close to as little the food going through as little processes as possible before it gets to you, etc., etc. And so yeah, that's sort of, you know, what led me to realize that food was impacting me in a major way and had an impact on all of the rest of these things. And that was sort of where I started to change it. I hope that answered your question. I feel like I went off on a tangent there. I do apologize about that. That was kind of long.
So I guess not the most important question I could ask after that story, but just to kind of make it relevant to the chapter, you talked about how food you had seen as not being very influential on your happiness, and then you noted that it was more influential, it was affecting you in more of a way that you gave it credit for, and decided to shift that. Was there anything from before that 2017 moment that you felt was highly influential and then turned out to not be as important as you thought? Or was it kind of all shifting things in one direction?
There's something before 2017 that I thought was highly influential but wasn't.
Yeah, that you shifted your view of once you kind of had this.
That was highly influential in like a positive or a negative way.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't think so, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think there was highly influential in a positive or negative way.
I can give you an example from my own life if that's helpful. So like, I think one of the things, obviously I'm bisexual. In the past I've been part of queer communities, and
I love it.
What was that reaction?
Because I clocked that my work friend or work colleague, whatever, message like, oh yeah, watch your podcast, I like it, and I'm like, well, all right, cool. I didn't know that this much information will be shared about your personal life. So yeah, I'll go for it, it's fine. I'm just like, oh, okay, there's another thing that's just like no, yeah, go for it.
So when I was feeling like a lot of my identity was linked to that queer identity, and like the way that I present myself as in terms of my womanhood, my femininity, felt like it was linked to that. The kind of kooky life choices that I make felt like it was linked to that. The kind of dynamics I expected from a partner in terms of being more equal, or like this kind of not necessarily all the kind of traditional separations being there, felt like it was linked to that. So it felt like I needed to really put that as an influential factor in my life, and go to lots of events, engage in a lot of that kind of thing. And what I found was there's so many different identities in the queer community that sometimes people would be saying stuff that didn't resonate with me, and then I'd be feeling this like undercurrent of, oh, that doesn't quite fit what I'm looking for, but we're all here with the same purpose of trying to find some kind of thing, like so it's still useful. And I think over time recognizing that that part of me is important, but it's not the most important thing. It's not a thing that I have to put on a higher shelf than all my other identities. And if a certain event is not resonating with me, I don't have to feel a certain way. I don't have to feel like my queerness is challenged by not resonating with other people who have different identities to me. And I started to feel like my expression in terms of how I dress, what choices I make in my appearance. Otherwise, none of them matter to you. I don't have to be with a woman to feel like I'm able to be a bit more masculine at times. I don't feel like I'm failing as a woman to present like that. So I don't have to be. It doesn't matter that I'm not attributing that as a queer attribute anymore. And if I look at the kind of power dynamics that I wanted in a relationship, I think that some of the things that I was seeing as being attributes I could only get from a more like feminine partner, in terms of the ability to really think deeply about feelings and talk them through in great detail, be more philosophical and like all of that things. You offer that, yet you are one of the most hyper masculine people I've ever come across. And so like that challenged that idea that a certain type of equality or a certain communication style came from that kind of community. I forgot the third point that I attributed to that. Oh, the kind of kookiness to some of the ways that I behave. I realized kind of ended up being more attributed to neurodiversity than my queerness. And those things are definitely linked, but like, it meant that I could step away and be like, it's part of me, but it doesn't have to be high on the hierarchy for it to be a part of me. It will be higher on other people's hierarchy because it will have more of an impact in their life. And it doesn't matter that I'm not on the same kind of scale of them in terms of how much it impacts my life. And I'm fine with who I am. So certainly if I was to think of something that I previously attributed as being highly influential in my life, now it's like I'm accepting of it being important in one sense, but I wouldn't say it's highly influential. I'd say that all the things that I attributed to it are still highly influential, but they now sit in different categories in my mind. They appear in my life in different ways that actually fit me better, and they fit me better because they're not having to align with a community of other people. They're just having to align with me. And like if it comes to how it aligns in our relationship, we can talk things through in great detail and understand where the kind of boundaries and accommodations for different things sit. And by thoroughly understanding the depths of each other's soul, we can make a much more personalized and much more fulfilling application of those principles, those kind of personality traits. And that feeling of being an individual and being recognized for the wholeness of my being feels much more authentic and alive in our relationship than it has before, and in the kind of friendships and communities that I was trying to access previously. Makes sense.
Yeah, it does. No, thank you for contextualizing that question, because, or give me a reference point, because I didn't know it was the thing. And so it sort of made me feel like, and first of all, thank you. Felt like he was saying nice things about me, maybe not. Not 100% sure, but thank you if you were, and if not, then it's fine. Okay, cool. But yeah, no, so I think for me, one thing that I didn't think was anything that would have had an impact was like journaling. So I had never journaled before. I had heard of people writing diaries, but it was mainly, I mainly only heard about women writing, like keeping journals or whatever. And so it felt like it was like a feminine thing. And also I don't enjoy the process of reading because I find it difficult. So like I only tend to read if I have to read, or if it's like a requirement for work or something like that, or if I'm trying to like consume some knowledge that I can then use in an argument in the future. And so writing, I just didn't really like. I'd always make up stories in my head, and stuff like that, like fun imaginatory stories and whatever, fictitious stories. but just never writing. So yeah, so like, you know, the writing process was like incredible, incredibly powerful, and has had a transformative impact on the way that I view life, and there's this sort of you know, psychological and physiological reaction that takes place when you really get something that is sitting heavy and weighing heavy on you out on some paper. And don't get me wrong, I've read back some of my journals and been like, who is that person and what does any of that mean? But I think one thing that's interesting, I think the reason that I sort of find it difficult to go back and like sort of find where those things may be is because obviously, so like we're a little bit different, right? In terms of like I'm anti-social and you're like pro-social, if you like. Hypersocial, yeah. And so like I'm very comfortable in my own company. I don't feel the need to be around other people at all. Don't get me wrong, I like to be around other people. I like to be around people that I like, you know. And I've got a lot of people that I love, but I just don't like. I'm so certain on, and you know, I think the thing about me as well is I'm particularly good at reducing down complex ideas to sort of simple principles, and because of that I don't find myself getting very confused about you know, who, like, you know, I'm aware that what's right for me isn't going to be right for everybody else. And so I'm not looking for what the right thing is. I'm just looking for what's right to me. And one of my core guiding principles is do no harm intentionally. You can't really go wrong with that, right? It means that, like, so that's the plant pot. In the plant pot is the seed, or whatever is the seed, and that seed's going to grow into like a tree of principles. But in the plant pot with the seed is the soil and all of the minerals that's required for it, and that's what's been reduced down to the most fundamental sort of statements, let's say. And do no harm intentionally is one of those things, right? And so no matter what shoots out of there, as long as you're doing no harm intentionally, people can say, oh well, that's not whatever, or it's like, well, if you want to think that, fine, but I don't need to be a part of something that has all of these other requirements around it to feel like a part of something. Because I was brought into this world by myself. My mum was there for sure, but she's going to be gone at some point, unfortunately. And when I die, I'm gonna be the only one dying. You know, no one's going to die along with me unless we do a suicide pact. So just by the way, if you want to, no, it's joking. Whatever. Obviously, I've got a very particular sense of humor, and so
Amy Winehouse, Eat Your Heart Out.
Why is that what she was like?
She had a song, didn't she? Where it's about her and her partner creating a suicide pact. I used to listen to a lot as a teenager and get all like emotional and thought I was really deep about it. So I was like, oh, how beautiful is that? You're in love so much. And yeah, she's describing like being sat on a kitchen floor where he looks like he's reaching a point of critical something. And it's dawning on her that she's made this suicide pact.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I really don't want to. And I don't intend to. But that's cool. But I do remember you saying that the other day, actually, to be fair, about you romanticizing it when you was a kid or something like that, or whatever. But yeah, so I don't have this like yearning to be a part of something, and so it means that like whatever I do, I'm pretty confident that it's what I want to do, and you know, and I'm a very reflective person as well, so I'm always looking back on my actions and stuff like that, and I'm always checking myself and being like, you know, like, was that the right thing to do? Like, did you, like, you know, could you have handled that differently? Like, what you're like and whatever. And you know, there's a lot of times where I'm just like, I could have been more softer with my approach or anything like that, and you know what, I should have looked a bit more deeply into that. But ultimately, was the intention true? Yes. Was the outcome that he was looking for achieved for the most part? And also, you know, can you go to sleep happy with the decision you've made? And it's like, yeah, most of the time. And so, yeah, you know, I don't think that there's much I can really look back on and be like, was there something that you didn't think had, you know, an impact? And then, you know, because yeah, like even before 2017. I basically live the same life now. It's just like the foundations are different. You know what I'm saying? I wake up at the same time every morning, really early in the morning. I go to the gym. I work really hard at multiple different things. I'm creative almost every single day. But I like to drink beer and alcohol. I like to play games, you know, and I like to do handstands.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that's basically kind of how I've always, and make music, and so that's kind of like how I've always lived my life, but also have like deep and rich relationships with people that I love and hold dearly, you know. And so like I just know what resonates with me, and I know that, you know, I can find all of that myself, you know what I'm saying? Sorry, I've tangent or what? I apologize.
I love your tangents. Hopefully over time we'll gather an audience who also loves tangents, because that's all we can do. But yeah, I think so many like little examples were coming up when you were saying we're different people, and talking through, like, I also struggle with reading, and also have a very vivid imagination that has a lot of like stories and things, and so I loved the idea of telling stories and writing books and making films, but felt like my inability to read very well was going to get in the way. And one of the huge feelings of achievement with writing this was making it through to the end. The amount of doubts that I have along the way, because it's like, well, who am I to be writing something when I can't even read very well?
You're Jane bloody Hearst, that's who.
Well, but all it takes is having a different view of the same challenge, right? Because there was one day that I sat there and I was like, but if I'm somebody that struggles to read, then I've got a more informed view of how to write for people that struggle to read than people that don't struggle reading. So if I can work out some core principles of how to write in a more accessible way, and don't get me wrong, my natural writing style is not accessible in the slightest, so I'll write it how it comes to my brain and then read back and be like, what on earth were you saying? Let's write that. That's like, what is it that you're trying to get people to take from this? And I think some of my experiences of being in like a business incubator has shaped that kind of idea of having an elevator pitch. If I had to reduce this down, what do I have to say? And your ability to reduce things down in your social life is very admirable to me, because it took me being on that business incubator to learn how to do that in a professional sense. I think I'm very good now in presentations in a work context of being like, here's some information. Here's what I want you to take away from this information. Here's some more information. Here's what I want you to take away from that information. But when it comes to my own life, my ability to reduce things down, nigh impossible. I think so conceptually. I think so much with like, oh, well, this example has made me feel this way and this example has made me feel this way. So if I just explain a multitude of stories, then people will get it right. And you'll sit there and be like, I don't understand what you're trying to communicate to me. And you're like, tell me what the learning from this is. I'm like, I don't know. I'm still working that out. But I feel something deeply. And like, so when being that kind of conceptual person, the things that can influence me can be so small and they affect me. And I had loads of examples and I can't remember any of them now because I'm just laughing. How ridiculous this all sounds.
No, it's not ridiculous at all, I don't think.
Like as a kid, if I stubbed my toe, if a doll fell down in the wrong direction, I would be furious. I'd be sitting there like, what did I do to you that made you hurt me this way? And I couldn't rationalize that it's an inanimate object. I know it's an inanimate object. I know it didn't have any intentions. Yet I'm still furious that it dared to do that to me when I've done nothing but care for it. So yeah, just presenting a little bit of my abstract brain to the world.
Inner workings.
But yeah, so like if I was to put it in an adult context, things like when I'm doing freelance work and I'm negotiating contracts, I'll go through all the details, I'll offer somebody something, and then if there's I think the professional term is scope creep, That's what my mum would say. Like I've understood a certain dynamic. I've then quoted based on what my understanding was. Something then shifts. And now I've got to go back and say, hi, I misunderstood this part. That's going to cost extra. Or like I wasn't planning this in. So we had a different understanding of what we were agreeing to. The parameters have changed. We need to carry on the negotiation. Those moments to me feel like my entire reputation is at risk now, that I'm going to seem incapable, or I'm going to seem like I am somehow an evil person that's trying to manipulate them when all I am doing is like, oh, I didn't understand what you thought we both understood. There's a new detail here that we now need to respond to. And those, I'm getting better at just being like, oh, I feel this way, but this is, no one else is going to feel this way, and trying to rationalize my way out of that emotion. But writing those emails to be like, here's a thing we need to solve, can feel huge to me, absolute huge, and life-threatening. So those small moments certainly have a great degree of impact, if I was to use this kind of language. And yet that same thing for somebody else would go completely unnoticed in their life. And I think that's what I found really useful about this particular frame, in terms of going, everybody's different. It doesn't matter if this thing feels really small. How much impact does it have on your life? How much influence does it have on your well-being? And it doesn't matter if you then recognize that the world is not going to suddenly bend over backwards to like accommodate those feelings. But by going, just recognizing this does have a big impact for me. So after I write that email, I'm going to give myself a tea break, because I need now some processing time for all those emotions. And then after the half hour off from doing work, I'm back to tapping away, working faster than ever. So like just allowing that recognition means I can now respond. I am now giving myself the kind of power and autonomy to shape how I deal with those emotions, how I deal with recognizing that that's highly influential to me. And if that's just going to be a bit of who I am, that's fine. Or in some of the ways we were talking about in the last episode, where it's like, okay, I'm not very good with conflict. Purposely engaging in a bit of discomfort might help me. We were talking this week about my knee messed up. Trying to then go, well, then I need to do more exercise at the gym that's going to hurt my knee in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to help. Things like I was saying, in terms of one of the reasons why I don't like doing punching things is because it reminds me of feeling weak against a kind of a perpetrator. You say that word? Perpetrator. I don't like being reminded of that feeling, certainly not in a public space like a gym. And your response was, you're going to have to. That's the only way you're going to feel stronger, just jump into it, is going through all those emotions. And I think like one of the huge things for me that made me feel more comfortable going to the gym regularly is I was like, well, sometimes it just feels so hard and I feel like crying, and that's difficult. And you're like, if there's any place to cry, the gym is it. And I was like, what? Like, I've got this macho bro interpretation of the gym, and you're telling me it's the best place to cry. What, like, mind-boggling for me initially. And yet having that idea that actually I want to be pushing myself to my absolute limit with the weights that I'm doing. And even if I cry during it, I've achieved more than if I just stayed within my comfort zone and put on a social performance as a consequence. And all of that shapes how strong I feel at the other side of it, and what I feel capable of, and then how much it's influencing me in the long run. Look at me, I went on a tangent too.
As well, we're tangent buddies. Yeah, we're on a tangent bike, because you get the tandem bikes, right? Which is, so it's a little one of them too. I think it's interesting to hear about So like, yeah, if we take it back to the gymnasium or whatever,
Your favourite place?
my
to
favorite
talk
place.
about?
Yeah. Now, yeah. Well, there's a lot to learn in the gym, though. there is a lot to learn in the gym.
To be fair, like in all seriousness, there is
Yeah,
a surprising amount that I've learned from going to the gym with you.
And you're mainly learning about yourself.
Yeah.
And there isn't really anyone to talk to, right? Like, I mean, for the most part, obviously we go to the gym together, so I talk to you at the gym, but for the majority of the time I've been going to the gym, I don't go with anyone.
Yeah.
I just go by myself and I put my headphones on and whatever. And like, you learn a lot about yourself. When I, like sometimes when I go to the gym, I tell you, I'm like, I could absolutely cry today. I just feel like I need to cry. But I don't necessarily, I don't think I've done it one time ever at the gym, but I feel it though, and I feel it, and I don't try to get rid of it. I let it just kind of sit just below the surface and whatever, and then I'm like, okay, cool, well, I'm gonna work through it. I'm gonna lift some weights and think about the technique and think about how many reps I've done and what's up next and whatever, and I'm gonna let it live just below the surface and see if it can be remediated in that moment. And it always gets remediated in that moment. What it is like, it's obviously there's going to be something that's causing this reaction or this emotion, but it's not necessarily something that can't be worked through, especially if it's like, it also causes, like, it could also just be like just a bit of baseline anxiety as well. And there's no better way to get anxiety out of your system like doing something physically challenging. And also you have a bit of a clearer head afterwards as well, right? Because you don't have this sort of physical movement requirement. Your head's a bit clearer. You're not necessarily like, you're not tired, but you feel like, I've done a thing, and there's a level of peace that comes along with that. And so if you want to then go home and you want to journal about it and be like, okay, cool, I feel like I've got a clearer head to be able to work through whatever it was that was. And often it's just that, like, I'm just tired, like I'm literally just tired. This is the umpteenth day in a row that I've woke up at this time and maybe had 6 hours sleep, and work's been stressful as hell. And so I think it is a really good place to like learn some stuff about yourself. But I wanted to bring up the point about you saying, when you say in your life you find it difficult to reduce things down or whatever, like you think conceptually and you find it, and I actually like, whilst, so I kind of do the same, like I think conceptually, or like I think I like to think holistically, and I like to look at loads of different things, and I like to live
burst of thought,
and I like to then like pick out a bunch of these potential viewpoints or potential outcomes, and then live in each one of those things momentarily and feel it out, and and whatever, and try to feel out all of the attributes of these different viewpoints and whatnot, and then pick a and then use a bit of all of that to determine where it is that I fall on a particular thing and whatnot. But then sometimes someone asks you a question, like I'm so resolved in what I feel in that moment that if someone says, oh, have you heard about whatever, and I'm like, I don't care, or yeah, but that's wrong, and so it can come off callous and hard, right? And it's like, and then someone's like, well, and then you've got to explain yourself and whatever, and and so I think there can certainly be like a downside to being too reductive as well, and it's not necessarily reductive in thought, it's just reductive in like communication. I've also experienced it the other way as well, where sometimes, like now and during this podcast, I've said too much. But at where I work, I've got my old manager, my manager's manager. They're really good at like professionally like refining things down to just giving just the information that's required to be able to tell whatever story or message it is that you're trying to pass on, and I think I found that to be really useful, because instead I like to, I mean, obviously here is a podcast, we kind of talk it out and feel it out and whatnot, but it's been really good at sort of getting my like saying, so I even use it like when we just speak personally and whatever, I'm like, okay, what is the outcome? Like, what is the attainable outcome that you're trying to achieve from this? Like, what's the user story, right? Like, tell me what's the point of, which sometimes sounds callous, right? But then you say it to me as well. You're like, what's the point? And they tell me all this, and I'm like, trying to make sure that I love you really as well. I'm trying but yeah, no, I think to give it a fair shake, I think, it can certainly be too reductive, and people can assume that you're being pretty callous, or like there's too many oversights on how you're thinking about things, and then you can get into a place where you've got so many different thoughts about a particular thing that you're not really able to communicate at all, and so it seems like you don't even know what it is that you feel. It's like you do, it's just you've not refined it down to a point or whatever, and so that's that really, I think so.
And I think that if I see like the comparisons to my own experience, I certainly go through that hearing lots of people's opinions and points of view on a topic, and the starting point, I can actually be very clear on where I stand, and sometimes I'm judging myself for that, and I'm like, that don't make me a good person for standing there, or like I feel like I'm maybe being too quick to come to that conclusion. How have I got there? And sometimes that can shift, but sometimes I just think about so many people's points of view, and like, but if I had this background, then the way I'd view the world would be different, and so in that scenario this wouldn't be wrong, but in my scenario it feels like it is wrong, and like I get to that kind of point of complexity where it's like kind of lost my voice in the sea of voices. Whereas I think that the difference in how we think is you think of everybody's point of view and then go, right, if I was to land, where does that leave me? And the good thing about you not being as hypersocial is you can just go, well, for me, where I stand matters more than anything else. And as long as I make my peace with that, that matters. And I'm certainly learning from you in that respect of being like, sometimes people are going to make me the bad guy, even when I have all the best intentions, even when I've thought about all their perspectives. And I am allowed to go, well, why aren't you thinking about my perspective? Like, or
why is why is your perspective worth more than mine?
Yeah.
Like, why is it more valid than mine? And I think if people, like what I found is that when in taking that approach, I've been able to do things like, forgive my father for like him being just not cool. And when I say not cool, just like a bad dad, and being absent and whatever. And, like even, people that have like done me wrong, really wrong. I'm like, I never forgive ever. I never forgive, and I never forget really. Sometimes I forget, sometimes because I'm like, because sometimes I'm like, okay, cool. So like,
I'll have I've hidden a birthday present that you continuously forget that you're searching for.
Yeah, I do forget because like I've made my peace with the thing, so I don't need to like it's been stored as a danger, right, or whatever, and so I trust myself to be like, as soon as I'm presented with this person or a similar scenario, my brain's like, that person's a danger or whatever, and so but so I never forgive, but I will certainly forget. Where was the jump off point? Can't believe I did this.
You said you forgive your relationship with your dad.
Yeah, but what was the jump off point? Like there was the thing there before that.
Thinking of people's points of view.
Yeah. And so, yes. And so like, like if I work through my dad's point of view or whatever, I'm like, first generation Nigerian, highly educated, fresh off the boat, come from the flipping Nigerian civil war, comes from a massive family, so having to fight for food and whatever, had to, the education was an absolute must and whatnot. Comes over here, experiences all that he experiences. As far as he's concerned, he has an entitled kid with a woman who doesn't respect where he believes he is and whatever. If I was there, like maybe I'd be the same as well. Like, you lot don't get it. Like you lot are living nice. Like, what are you on about? Do you know what I'm saying? And so like the moment that you can sort of like move yourself, again, it doesn't mean that this man is forgiven in my mind. It doesn't mean that I like him. It doesn't mean that I respect his decisions or anything like that. But can I see where this person's coming from? Yeah, sure. You know what? I will grant you that. Like I get it. And could I argue that if, you know, I was the exact same circumstances landed on my, you know, I walked in his exact same shoes and I didn't have the mind that I have, would I do the exact same actions? Probably, you know, because we don't truly know what it's like to live someone else's life. But it doesn't also mean that his you know, the way that he would deal with a situation is any more valid than mine. And it doesn't necessarily mean the way that I would handle a situation is any more valid than his. But as long as it stems from doing no harm intentionally, then I think like it's good overall. Do you know what I'm saying? Maybe, I don't know. It's
well,
difficult.
and I think it's that sphere of influence that we've talked about in the past of like, one of the things for me is being able to go, okay, well, having kind of love or respect for somebody and their point of view and their choices in life can live simultaneously with my boundaries. I can say, well, you don't belong in my life, but that doesn't mean that I disrespect what you want from yours. And being able to let those things that feel like they're kind of contradicting each other, yet they do sit nicely with each other at the same time, just sit where they are, I think brings a lot of peace, even though it's like initial turmoil of wanting people to be accepted. And I think that probably comes from a very particular part of me of going through an experience of not being accepted for who I am along the way. I want to be that person that accepts people for who they are. But if it doesn't align with my life, it's not necessarily that I need to reject them wholeheartedly, but I do need to go, the people that matter the most, first and foremost, me, my own, my family, my closest friends are the people that need to have some prioritization in how I behave, who I give time to, who I make feel comfortable in a space. All these people, then there's degrees of separation of how much time and energy I'm expected to give to them. And if there's somebody on the furthest outskirts of that sphere of influence, then it doesn't matter if I want them to know that I respect everything they are. All they need to know is they don't belong in my closest sphere of influence, and they can take that how they want to. Yeah. So one of the things, if we bring it back to this scale, is in the chapter I look at the distinction between how that scale can be used. So when I was doing research with the participants, we used an 8-point scale. So number 1 at one side, number 8 at the other, or the numbers that come in between and between. And when we had physical post-it notes, and if something was not very influential, it went in 1. If it was highly influential, it went in 8, and anywhere in between. So that was a really clear way of visualizing where things fell on that scale. And in that context, the numerical scale was perfectly suited to simplifying that activity. It was recognized that scale was subjective. They thought it belonged in 8, so 8 meant whatever it meant to them. Whereas if we were starting to think about promoting services, if I was like, this is an 8 out of 8 service, well, only for one person, right? If we're accepting that these factors influence different people in different ways, then we need to back up that claim of numbers. We need to be clear with what we mean by numbers, and so it gets a bit more complicated. Thinking about how we incorporate scale into the way that we discuss things, and this can be for the general population as well. So an example might be, you might say that the gym is highly influential to you. So it's one of the things that you're doing day to day. And it means that when you wake up at 5 a.m, you go, I really don't want to go to the gym.
4:30.
4:30 in the morning.
Then start trying to
I wake up at 5
yeah,
in the
you always
morning.
at 5 a.m. Goodness gracious me. This service or what?
I think anything above 8 a.m. is going to make most people think, well done.
You mean below 8 a.m.?
When you wake up at 4:30 a.m. and you feel like, I really don't want to go to the gym today.
Every morning.
You remind yourself that it's highly influential on your life that you do go, and it's going to have an impact, and it's what you stand for, right? What do you do then?
Well, so that's what happens at first, right? But then like so this is what I think is interesting about all of this, right? Is that I'm the worst person for this. I'm the worst person you could be speaking to about this, but only because me, I would like, I'd never go to therapy.
Yeah.
No matter what.
But that's fine. People respond to their mental
things
well-being in a
differently.
different way.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But like you can't convince me that it would benefit me ever. You know what I'm saying? It would cause me more stress going to therapy. And like, I don't ever want to socialize a problem that I've not already resolved in my mind. You know what I'm saying? Or anything like that. But there is this book called Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. I believe it was written.
I heard you mention that one before.
You've not heard me mention this?
No.
Still surprised you, baby. And it was like written in like the early 1900s. He talks about this thing called hypnotic rhythm, and it's that either good or bad, if you continue to do something over a long enough time period, hypnotic rhythm dictates that like it will just become a part of one of your behaviors and you will no longer need to do it. So waking up at 4:30 a.m. at first, it is certainly like, I've got to get up, like I'm motivated to perpetuate this particular kind of behavior and become this kind of person. But now it's just like, the thing is, I don't want to get up. But this is what I do, and so I just get up, and it just becomes this. And then now what I do is now I look to the thing, because I have a routine in it. So I'll go through my routine, and so I get up and it's like, okay, cool. I need to get to this next step of the routine, and I need to get to this next step, and like that's what it becomes, rather than it becomes this like conscious, like I want to be. But it was certainly started off like that. But over a long enough time period, it's like I don't really do anything else. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So sorry to interrupt and caught you up on it.
Okay, well, so my understanding was that when you set up this routine of deciding that you're going to wake up early, go to the gym, and make it a fundamental part of what you chose to do every day, when you decided that it was a principle that you didn't have the option of taking multiple days off every week, part of that was fueled by the understanding that it was going to impact you for the better.
Yeah. But that's not the conversation that goes off in my mind, because that is, and so like the reason that's part of your understanding is because when we first met and were speaking and whatever, that would have been like, this is why I do it, and that is gonna, because that is still the reason that I do it, but it's not the thoughts that I have whilst doing it. Do you know what I'm saying? It's just become part of a learned behavior.
Well, I guess that's what I'm trying to say though, is that this language is useful for the things that we do that we don't pay recognition to, and that we just get into a rhythm of, and then sitting back, you're in a place where you're happy with what you're doing for your mental health, you're feeling like you're kind of in a good place with it, I think.
Yeah, I think so, probably.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should be feeling like I want to cry sometimes though.
Why?
Because
crying's a natural emotion.
Yeah, no, it's definitely natural when there's a reason to cry, isn't it? But if I can't even really find a reason to cry, it's like, well, I'm not going to cry then, am I? Because sometimes you need to just do it though. Yeah. But
sometimes your work is incredibly stressful and you just muster through and then don't realise there is a reason to be feeling.
There is a reason, but if it's not good enough for me to put my finger on it. And I've
been bringing a lot of stress to your life too.
Who, you? Nah, never.
Or am I overthinking about everything? Nah, bring that to your plate, don't you? And you always make space for me to air it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if it's at the detriment of your well-being. Evening.
No, I don't believe in that because, you know, me being the way that I am, will bring a certain level of stress to your life, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, but that's what happens when you invite somebody into your life. You adopt their ways, and you know, and it's clear that like humans are the way that they are, and they're all different, and they have their quirks and whatever, and their little bits. And so inviting a human into your life, you're inviting a certain amount of chaos, right? And you're volunteering the you know, partial ownership of that. And so I don't think, you know, I don't you know, yeah, I wouldn't really say, you know, it's not I tell you when there's undue stress, I'm like, hey, gee, chill, baby, come, god damn, you know. But for the most part, no, you're all good, man. It's nice to have you about, you know what I'm saying?
It's just a little nice.
It's nice to have you around. I like having you around. Yeah, you're a good lass, you're all right, isn't it?
So yeah, I think in terms of that, recognizing that you do multiple things in a day that service how you feel in your life. So you've said that you want to be at service to others. Yeah. So in a daytime, you don't choose between helping one of your friends out or going to the gym. No. You go, well, it's my principle that I go to the gym. It's my principle that I'm in service to others. Yeah. And somebody, there's a opportunity here to be in service to someone. Yeah. Both of those things influence how you feel about yourself, what you stand for, your mental well-being. Yeah. And part of where this scale might come in is being able to go, here's one of the things that absolutely needs to prioritize because it's super important that I do that. Yeah. And maybe the being in service to others, well, you're at home a lot of the time. How many people you come into contact that you need to be in service to on a daily basis. It might not be that on a daily basis you're presented with opportunities to be in service to others, but you're always readily available to do it where it's necessary, where it's the right time. I'm
kind of almost always editing a video. Do you know what I'm saying? Almost always.
For somebody, yeah.
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 Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But that's why I do it. That's why I've set life up the way that I have, baby. So it's like, let me come do this big thing for you, physical person right now. And I won't have to see you for ages. It's going to take me a while to edit this video down. But I know that all of this, you know, this labor is all going to be in service. Yeah, you know, so you ain't going to see me for ages, but you're going to be very happy with me at the end of it, you know? Yeah. And so that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then I'm sure there's some other examples from your life where you might not experience them daily. So on paper, they might not be something that is influencing your life as readily as the gym, but it's still important that it's there. Yeah. And I think coffee. Yeah. You have coffee every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying that is something that influences my life. Coffee and nicotine. Yeah. Yeah.
One of my favorite things is when you come to the gym having not drank coffee. It's like twice a year it happens. Suddenly I feel so badass that I'm capable of going to the gym without coffee.
I'm capable as well. You've seen it. My preference is to just get all jacked up. Yeah. And a slight level, I like to have a slight level of anxiety as well. Yeah. And coffee makes me a little bit anxious. I like to feel that. I like to feel that uncomfortable feeling, you know, that like, I kind of nervous to go to the gym right now. And you get there and you work it out.
Yeah. But yeah, so for different individuals to see the ways that different things impact their lives on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, recognizing that multiple things are impacting them at once is super important. And one of the things that this frame tries to say, and in terms of looking in kind of, if I'm use some jargon for a bit, we call that health literacy, or in this case, mental health literacy. One of the kind of like public health outcomes is for members of the public to be more understanding of health and how it impacts them, how they can take ownership over their behaviors around health. So being able to recognize that there's multiple things impacting my mental health on a daily basis. This one's really something that I need to prioritize. This is something that I want to incorporate wherever possible, but it doesn't matter if it's there all the time. Having that awareness is really important for us being able to plan how we want to create a mentally well existence, I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think people don't necessarily consider the amount of chaos that they invite into their lives and how much that can have an impact. But if you are just like a little social butterfly or whatever, and if you're one that is particularly empathetic, then like, you know, hearing lots of people talk about their problems all day probably isn't going to be something that makes you, you know, get into bed at night time and be like, and just feel like a feather ready to go to sleep. It's probably you're probably going to be weighed down a little bit, you know. But then also it's a double-edged sword because you love the socializing and stuff. Do you know what I'm saying? Not the you, the universal you. And so, you know, you end up in this sort of and then but like people that like are workaholics, right? It's like they're sort of married to the job and whatever, and they love it. They love the feeling that they get from, you know, having a full day's work or delivering a project or whatever it might be, doing something that no one else thought that could be done at work. But then there's the amount of stress that comes along with that as well, right? And working these long hours and saying yes to everything and hardly saying no to anything and whatever. And so there's all of these sort of like double-edged swords around, you know, what can have that impact and how people might see. It's like, no, but I really like doing it, you know, and so I'm going to put it at number 8 on the scale of it impacting me positively. And then, you know, if you don't look at it critically, and this is where I think journaling comes in good, because you can just write all of this down, you know, this stream of consciousness down, and then, you know, you're like, but actually, maybe it's also kind of breaking me down a little bit, to be honest with you. Like maybe it's actually kind of negatively impacting me because of the way that I'm going around it and whatever. But then it just becomes like, you know, like a risk acceptance kind of thing. Is like, oh, do I accept that risk? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? I will just be stressed out, and just that's the way it is. Yeah. Kind of thing. Sorry, I apologize.
So we're kind of wrapping up. Obviously, with all of these episodes, we try to end on looking at how creativity can be applied to the frame. You've just been mentioning journaling, which is great because I was struggling to think of something. But what was going through my head is there are things, obviously, in the last episode I mentioned that I used to do dancing before going to bed, and that was, at that time, a daily habit that I did. It's kind of been replaced by the gym more recently, that kind of physical movement. And I certainly think that going through periods of singing a lot or making music with you are things that I find influential enough that I need them to happen semi-regularly, but I don't need them to happen every day. I think that the kind of creativity that I can attribute to needing most days is in a more kind of like problem solving scenario. So like at the moment I'm editing another book and it's requiring me to work with around about 60 different chapters worth of authors. And that's a lot of people to be communicating with, and each of them have ideas of how they want to shape that chapter that's different to how I originally had planned it, and that influences the word count and the way that I bring in other collaborators and how they work together, and all these different kind of miniature problems. But by having this kind of guiding idea of what this book stands for, why I got excited about proposing it to publishers in the first place, what it might have an impact on in the world, really excites me, to the point where all those little problems, I'm like, I'm ready for this. And yet put me in a different industry and require me to do those same skills, and I might be like, I'm incapable of this. So having that kind of, passion for what I stand for, and being able to use creativity as a way of problem solving my way there. And even things like creating these podcasts or thinking about different ways we might be able to use the skills we have as filmmakers, your audio, in terms of like music production background, any of the kind of storytelling stuff that I've done in the past. How can we use all of this experience we have combined to make something that aids this mission or this passion that I have? Thinking about different ways to work around industry limitations or the kind of time restrictions that people have that I want to collaborate with. All of those little challenges I find very fulfilling to my day-to-day. And so it for me, that is creative health, because I'm still having to think creatively every day. That creative reimagining of how we might evolve health systems, how we might change the way that people in society feel an autonomy over the way that they feel happy and well. That makes me really excited. Yeah, I guess, do you have any other examples that you think benefit from talking in terms of scale?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, so laughter, I'm a big fan of comedy, like a really big fan of comedy. And so like, I know that like I always feel much better about the day in general if I've, you know, watched some comedy, because comedy really is an art form, you know, like it truly is. You know, there are good comics and there are bad comics, and there are some comics on that have, you know, good days, but are still great comics, and those same comics can have bad days, right? And so, you know, seeing how they navigate, especially even like conversations, right? So like even the way that they navigate conversations on podcasts and things like that. I love to look at the patterns in which they speak, and how they articulate themselves in particular, and how they get to a point, and how they set up a joke, and the path that they take you on. The amount of paths that I take you on for just a joke, right? I think there was one yesterday maybe that was fun, and you know, you get annoyed by it because you're like, what joke are you trying to make?
Sometimes it's clear you're making a joke before you've even started because of the way you're setting it up.
And so yeah, so like just like laughter, you know, and just being able to laugh at your pain as well is like a powerful thing, and I really believe in that as being like an effective tool for me. And so yeah, I would just say, you know, like laughter, but you know, in particular, you know, trying to use creative ways to make yourself laugh, or to you know, be a little more, you know, I want to say sophisticated with your laughter. I mean, and like you know, looking at how you know, a joke has been constructed, or situationally how the conversation has come up, and you know, the facial reactions and stuff like that, you know, just try to, you know, for me personally, having that more critical view of all of the moving parts, finding it funny and being able to deconstruct it, for me is like really fun. And so like, it's something that helps me throughout the day to just be like, yeah, I can't wait to, you know, try speak like that at some point, or you know, have a joke with my friend and set it up in this way and whatever. And so well,
and I do think one of the things that I like about applying humor in our communication is where it feels like we've had a necessary conflict, but there's that kind of unease around that topic, being able to bring humor in, and kind of something that I took far too seriously, being able to take the piss out of myself and be like, here's where I'm at with it. I recognize that I took that a little bit seriously there. Kind of brings this sense of bringing each other back together, which is really beautiful. And like, I've seen some of my friends, like they've had like parents die, and my natural response is to go into like counselor kind of mode of being ready for whatever emotion might come up, and asking them how they're feeling. And I've had people be like, the best thing you can do for me is just tell jokes. Like, I'm telling jokes about this scenario because that's how I'm getting through. And being able to take this experience and creatively think about how I might be able to make a joke out of it makes me feel a different way about it. And that was difficult for me to adjust to at the time, being like, okay, we're just going to make a joke about this. But it was what that person needed for their mental health. And so I think humor does have a great place to play in life. I had another example for us that I now can't remember, but it's all right. It was super cool. Yeah.
I believe you. I believe you.
Yeah. Maybe I'll have to tell it in the next episode. Yeah.
Stay tuned for the next episode.
Keep you all in suspense.
Cliffhanger.
Well, we'll end it there then. So thank you so much for joining us today for this episode. And hopefully you'll join us again next week when we have episode 3 of Creating Mental Wellbeing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you would like to see more of our episodes, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and we'll put the link on the screen.
Right here. Yeah, the link will be here. In between, just above in between us, I think you say.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Let's not commit ourselves too strongly to it.
No, we've done it now. We figured it out.
Thanks, guys. Take care.